Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Daniel Kelly, the Academic Director for Graduate Programs for the Preston Roberts Institute for Global Sport. Tonight's Alumni Insider Series is on sports betting, and it'll be led by three of our very own students, John Rose, Ben Schleider, and Paulina Manis. All right, John, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Dr. Kelly, and welcome to everyone who's in attendance tonight. We have a really special segment for you this evening. Our special guests are from 76 Capital, Dan Bravado and Evan Davis. I'll let them actually just go into their background first to kind of give everyone a sense of their accomplishments thus far in the industry and what 76 Capital as a firm is all about. So welcome both of you, and you can take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks, John. I'll kick it off. Appreciate it and excited to be here with everybody. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Dan Bravato. I'm the president of 76 Capital Sports Advisory. My background is in traditional sports. I graduated from NYU Sports undergrad in 2011 and went on to work for Van Wagner Sports on the agency side. Went to the property side, worked for International Speedway Corp and NASCAR, and then transitioned over to the brand side and worked for Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans, doing their sports marketing. Did a bunch of stuff in Dan Gilbert, the owner of the Cavs, the owner of Rocket Mortgage's world. Worked for Fathead, worked on some internal projects, did some esports and gaming work, and then transitioned over to Manchester City of the English Premier League. I was director of partnerships for the Americas region for them. And during this time, kind of fell in love with the esports and gaming space and decided to launch my own agency, which was about 2.5 years ago. Launched that agency, worked with everyone from Major League Soccer to Bud Light to the owners of the Vikings and their Call of Duty League franchise, Minnesota Rocker, and then joined up forces with 76 Capital, who's a sports venture capital firm founded in '99, investing in all sorts of things in the tech landscape until 4 years ago. Created a sports tech dedicated fund, and that fund was focused on esports, sports betting, new media, streaming, so forth and so on. And about a year ago or so, 76 came up with the idea of launching a consulting firm that runs parallel with the venture firm. So we are a consulting firm that focuses on those emerging areas. So we have experts in the different verticals from sports betting to esports and gaming to social responsibility. And so I sit atop that firm, and my company that I had started had rolled up into 76. So it's no longer I'm now part of 76 Capital. And our sports betting expert is Evan Davis, who I'll let him introduce himself, but we're very excited to have him on. He unfortunately is not an NYU alum, which you'll notice from his shortcomings on the education side, but he's a great guy nonetheless, and we'll do his best to keep up with us Violets over here, or Bobcats, I guess now. So I'll let Evan take it from here.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, sadly, I'm not an NYU alum, although as I told these guys earlier, when I was in school in Philadelphia, my wife lived in New York at 8th and Mercer, so I feel like I know the area well and have probably frequented some of the same spots, although if any of them still exist, that was more than a couple of years ago. But in any event, it's great to be here. So my background is as an attorney. Out of law school, I worked at 2 larger law firms in Philadelphia, and then in 2015 became the general counsel at what was then called Sugar House Casino, now Rivers Casino in Philadelphia. And while there, got interested in sports betting. Obviously, at the time, federal law called PASPA was still in existence, which precluded states like Pennsylvania from launching sports betting. But in 2018, that all changed, and this federal law was deemed unconstitutional, and it opened the doors for states, New Jersey, Pennsylvania being 2 of the early adopters, to launch sports betting. And I kind of dove in head first. Obviously, had to oversee the legal and regulatory side of that, given my job, but really got a lot more involved. Got into the operational weeds, the marketing side, all of those things, started speaking at a bunch of conferences, got to know a lot of the players in the industry, and really started to sort of gain a reputation within that field, separate and apart from being a lawyer. So earlier this year, left there, joined up with Dan and Wayne Kimmel and the other folks at 76, and helped to get this advisory firm launched. And so I oversee our sports betting vertical, where we really help companies that are looking to do business that touches on sports betting. And that could range from professional sports teams to startups that have some sort of business-to-business technology that they want to implement, experiential marketing companies, broadcast television. I mean, you name it. It's a vast array of clients and potential clients where we've seen a lot of interest in this field. And you know, as you guys know, it's now been, PASPA was thrown out about 2.5 years ago. Roughly half of the states around this country have legalized sports betting in some form, but we got a lot of ways to go and a lot of area for that market to grow. So I think when we look back at this in, you know, 5, 6, 7, 10 years, today, it's not going to look anything like it looks today. And that's really exciting. There's a lot of room for growth.
No, that's great. And, you know, thanks again for taking the time and joining us this evening. You know, I think a good place to start, and a question that probably pertains to a handful of the people tuning in tonight is, and I guess you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but if we could flesh that out as to what attracted you to the industry in the first place. Was there a particular catalyst that prompted you to make a career out of it rather than kind of participating in it in a more casual setting?
Yeah, I'll kick that off. Obviously, Evans is far more robust and in-depth than mine, so mine will be a little bit quicker. I've been a gambler most of my life. I remember sitting in NYU classes betting illegally at the time, which I don't know if that's disclosing anything. Evan's an attorney, he'll protect me. But have always been very passionate about the space. Have always been very passionate about the space and very interested in it. And for me, I always saw it as a matter of time, right? Is because we know the effects of it. We know the benefits of it from a game that is a 40-point blowout. If someone has a -38 spread, all of a sudden it's way more interesting, and TV viewership will maintain, if not increase, as a byproduct of that. And so I've always been really passionate about it. It's been amazing for me to transition into this world and have folks like Evan and Wayne, who are super educated on the space, be my shepherds and my mentors as I learn it. So that's kind of what interests me and what got me into it. And Evans obviously is a little more vast than that. So I'll let him share his background or his story here is why he jumped in.
Yeah, I don't know if mine's more vast. If anything, it's probably simpler, which is that when you're a practicing lawyer, you kind of look for anything to do other than practice law. And so when something lands on your plate, you kind of jump at it. And I kid, but that's really more than half true. I mean, I'm a huge sports fan. I went to Duke, where I was a sports writer for our paper. So we won a national title. I was sort of lived and breathed sports. And then, you know, went to law school, was practicing law, and was looking to go in-house, honestly, sort of agnostic as to what industry it was, but just looking to really get more involved in the business side of a company. And wound up joining what was then called Sugar House Casino in a role that I could have kind of only dreamed of. And, you know, to this day, my wife kind of asked me how I managed to talk my way into that role, given that I didn't really have any experience in the industry or anything else. But loved it there. And so while I was there and sports betting became legal, I mean, it was just one of those opportunities that landed on my plate. And, really started to learn as much as I could and do as much as I could because A, I think the company appreciated it, and B, it was fun, it was interesting. And then, you know, when I've known Wayne for several years, and when he and I were speaking, you know, much earlier in 2020, and he was sort of telling me about this idea, and I said, like, let's talk again, and it all just sort of panned out. So I think, you know, some people maybe take more deliberate paths to having careers in a certain industry. Mine was anything but that. It was there was an opportunity that presented itself, and I think I at first jumped at it not thinking that it would even be my career, just that it was sports betting was something interesting, and my existing job, you know, sort of played into it. And then when you see additional opportunities, you decide if you want to take a run at them or not, and that's where I am.
Great. Yeah, I think, you know, people participate in sports betting, whether they realize it or not, in a multitude of capacities, right? Whether it's a $5 exchange between a couple of your buddies over a fantasy football league, or someone maybe who is in a legalized state that actually formally places bets more frequently. But at the end of the day, I think, and feel free to opine on this, it's a pretty powerful fan engagement tool, and something that maybe can grow or even convert people into sports fans, given the newfound layer that it presents?
Yeah, I'll start because Dan can offer a lot more insight in given his background in sports, I think, as to what this all means, right? But at the outset, absolutely, sports betting increases fan engagement, right? You stay involved, you stay tuned in, or you tune in the first place to a game that you might not care about because you bet on it and you don't need a whole lot of money, right? You might need $5 or $10 on something, and now suddenly you care, and you're watching it to the end, and you're seeing you're checking out the spread, and you're staying in tune with it all the way through the end. And what does that do? Yeah, look, I'll let Dan speak to this, but I mean, at its core, it puts more eyeballs on the screen or on the game, right? And it gets people more tuned in. But secondly, I think to your point, right, is that it increases the pool of people who might be interested in it, right? And so if you think about how sports itself increased its fan base over the last several decades, and how many more people, like the NFL is probably a quintessential example of this, but the demographics today of the people that are into the NFL and the demographics from 30 years ago are nothing like each other, right? Gender, age, I mean, like literally every demographic breakdown, it's totally different. The NFL has done a fantastic job of expanding its fan base. Sports betting will take a similar trajectory. It's just a matter of when and how. So there is someone that doesn't exist right now that will figure out a way to take people who, I use this example all the time, but I grew up in Pittsburgh. My mom is, she's 68 years old. She probably could name 10 Pittsburgh Steelers, and she'll watch games on occasion when they're on TV and my dad's got it on and whatever. And she like quote roots for them, but she doesn't really know football. They're unequivocally, like, given the right opportunity, my mom would like potentially bet $10 on the Steelers, right? But she's never going to do that in the current landscape because the current platforms are intimidating and whatnot, and it's just not something she thinks she's interested in. So the question is, how does the industry get her interested? And not because she's going to be that lucrative of a customer. She's betting like $100 a year, but now you've got her information. You can say, right, you've got all of this data. If you're a company that's branching out into multiple streams, you can market to her different ways, online casino, all these different things. So I think when you look at how sports betting is going to extend its fan base, it will be a similar trajectory to the way that certain sports have been able to do so. But in terms of what that extra engagement means, Dan sort of lived and breathed this for over a decade now.
Yeah, I think, Evan, that's great. And I totally agree with you. And I think from the pandemic, we have a perfect example. I mean, firsthand, you can see this trend in esports and gaming betting. And I have friends that I witness do this, and I see it via handle and hold on several of the sports betting operator side, is when it comes to these esports orgs, I'll use CSGO, which is Counter-Strike Global Offensive, which is basically a last man standing type role. They got to plan and defuse a bomb. It's fairly simple from a viewership experience. You have one life, you die, and then the rest of your team continues on. And this game saw a massive uptick in betting because there was nothing else to bet on. And because of that, people started watching this league that may or may not have ever played the game, may or may not have ever played video games or currently play video games. But we saw this massive uptick in it because it was something to bet on. And that has stayed, and we've seen that continue to grow in different esports during and throughout the pandemic as sports kind of came and went, and different versions of sports and different seasons. And so I think without a shadow of a doubt, there is proof right there that people will leverage betting as a way for fan engagement. And I think as Evan and I spend a lot of our time talking to newer or startup leagues that are not the big four or big five, one of the first questions they always ask us is, how do we get betting? I mean, we're seeing this a lot in the lacrosse landscape. You can see it with the PLL that they just signed their deal with DraftKings. It's kind of a necessity. If you want to be recognized and you want to be approached by new fans and give fans a reason to watch, I think betting's an excellent way to do it. And there's a reason all of these leagues are looking for betting partners. It's just simple fact that if you have this opportunity, it allows people to engage with you that may not have previously. And sure, you can acquire customers the old-fashioned way, like every other sports league has before gambling, but there's a much easier way to do it right now, and there's no reason not to, assuming the legality in your area and in your state.
Sure. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that perspective only helped to kind of bolster that a bit. But something you did touch on was the pandemic and the current climate, right? It's obviously put a pause on traditional sports as we've seen it, but esports hasn't really seen anything negative. It's probably increased in popularity and traction, but obviously at the other end of this, there's going to be a massive deficit revenue wise for these leagues, for these teams. Does the revenue generating potential of the sports betting industry now become increasingly attractive given the detriments COVID-19 put upon these leagues?
Yeah, I'll speak from a sports perspective and then let Evan weigh in on some of the more specific financials. But from a sports standpoint, I mean, you look at the number of states that currently have deals, and I can tell you firsthand that the deals in Michigan are seven figures that these teams are getting from the betting operators. And that's a lot of money. I mean, when you're talking about losing ticketing revenue, you're losing concession revenue, merch, all of these kind of things. If you can get a couple $1 million from a category that didn't exist previously, and to put that into perspective for you, a seven-figure sponsorship in the NBA, NHL is equivalent to, damn near close to a naming rights deal. I mean, the average naming rights deal in the NBA is about $4 or $5 million. So if you're telling me you can get a couple $1 million from a category that didn't exist previously, that can certainly make up for some of these missed revenue opportunities that they're not getting from ticket and concession. So I think it's absolutely something that everyone looks at. And when you look at something that I know Evan will talk about is the neighboring states, when you see, looking how silly it might seem that New Jersey, you can bet mobilely, and it's the number one state in the country with $800 million in revenue last month. And then you have New York, which is a simple train ride away, as you guys all know, not having it. If you're the Yankees and you play in New York and you look at it and you're the Mets and you're saying, well, wait a minute, the Jersey teams have these partnerships and, we have them in some capacity, but how is this fair? And we see this in Ohio as well. And we see this in Indiana, as Indiana now has a bunch of partnerships and Ohio's starting to get there. This revenue can't be ignored, and it's out there. So, Evan, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the specifics in terms of the handle that the different states have seen and kind of how that impacts everything, but I think it makes a ton of sense.
No, it does. And what you said is entirely accurate. But there's also another element to this, which is the tax revenues that it generates. So sports teams aren't the only ones who are being hurt from the pandemic financially, right? Like state governments are getting killed as well because their tax revenues have dried up across a variety of fronts. So when these legislatures go to budget for, everyone's got different fiscal years, but let's call 2021. I mean, they've got massive holes that they need to fill. And so, look, sports betting is not a panacea. It's not going to generate billions of dollars in tax revenues for a state, but every little bit helps. And even more so if you're a state where you watch tax dollars flow to a different state. So, Dan brings up the New York, New Jersey example. I mean, I wrote something in Cranes, when was it, like a month or two ago maybe, about just this exact issue. Like New York State is costing itself millions of dollars in tax revenues by not having mobile sports betting. Because if you live in Manhattan, your options are to make a legal sports bet, right? Are to either take and people do this, they would take the ferry to Weehawken, make their bets on their phone and not get off, just come back, right? And that's still infinitely more convenient than driving up to the Catskills, right? So it's New York, and the state taxes vary. Pennsylvania's is obscenely high at 36%, but most states for mobile betting are in the low teens, call it maybe between 10 and 15% ish and they're taxed to the sports betting operator on essentially their profits, right? The money that they make off of sports bets. So again, it's not a massive number, but it's it's in the millions. And so for a state that matters. And it really matters if those tax revenues are happening anyways, they're just going to a different state instead of yours. So so whether or not you're a state like Ohio that hasn't yet legalized this and you're watching people go to Indiana on one side, Pennsylvania on the other, whether you're a state like New York that's watching your mobile betting leave for New Jersey, I think that is putting increasing pressure on state legislatures to legalize this activity and capture those tax revenues, because the pandemic has made that even more of a necessity.
Right. Now, there's obviously some news that came out regarding Michigan. I think it was yesterday. And for those of you that aren't aware of it, and guys, correct me if I'm wrong on any of my facts here, but I think the Bipartisan Joint Committee on Administrative Rules waived that 15-day waiting period that is a particular requirement for the next moves to be made on betting legislation. So essentially what this does is it allows the Michigan Gaming Control Board to file that necessary paperwork and essentially grant the final approval for operations in the state. And it was supposed to happen in January 2021, but now they're saying it could happen by the end of December. And given, I think, Michigan is the 11th most populated state, it seems like that's a pretty big push to be a major player in the industry going forward. So it obviously relates to everything that you just mentioned, Evan, as regards to in regards to the benefits it can offer on a state-by-state basis.
Yeah, and they're not the only one. So Illinois, back when the pandemic was sort of starting to really spread and over the summer, Illinois had a rule that basically required people to sign up for their accounts in physical casinos. Then you could bet mobile, but you had to go to a casino to sign up. And then their casinos closed because of the pandemic. So they changed. So it's like, okay, well, let's change this, right? And let's get rid of this. And they're cognizant of the fact that people are not going out the same way, right? You're less likely to go to a casino if the casino is even open in the first place. So if you don't have mobile, let's get mobile going, right? If we don't have this, let's get it going, because the reality is people are sitting on their couches. I mean, people always sat on their couches and watched sports, but like now you can almost do it guilt-free because there's not too much else you can realistically be doing, right? So if people are doing this, it's like, and they're going to bet on sports, I mean, let's let them do it, because why are we telling them to get in their car and drive 45 minutes and to do it so that they can just go back home and sit on their couch and watch sports? That's crazy.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Evan, and something I'd love for you to talk about a little bit is mobile, right? Because I think a lot of folks, and I was guilty of this when I first came on board before I spent some time with you, is, okay, so sports betting is legal in New York. I pull out my phone, I open an app, but I can't do it. So I don't really understand that. And so it was a progress that I spent time understanding. And it's really interesting is like New Jersey is 90% mobile sports betting, give or take. Colorado was even higher. And so what they're seeing is this consistent mobile. But why are some states still refusing to go mobile versus tethered, which you mentioned with having to go to the casino or just solely brick and mortar?
Yeah, I mean, it's largely politically driven, based on what the state's current casino gaming landscape is. And to the extent that a state has brick and mortar casino gaming, obviously those entities, pay the significant amount for their licenses and whatnot. And so they're going to, they obviously don't control the process, but they're going to have a fairly significant voice in that process. But for mobile, it's just kind of a no-brainer, like even if it has to flow through the casino. So in Pennsylvania, for example, where we have, a dozen commercial casinos, only those casinos can be licensed to do sports betting, to act as a sports betting operator. And then they sort of, essentially like lease out that license to a different operator if they so choose. So that's how FanDuel and DraftKings are live in Pennsylvania, is that they have deals with two of the brick and mortar casinos in Pennsylvania, versus a state like Tennessee, where there's only mobile sports betting and anyone can do it. Like right? You and I can create a company and go try to get a license if we want to in Tennessee. So So every state set it up differently. The short answer is that it's largely due to what the politics of that state are, who the stakeholders are, and how they want to go about doing it. But you're right, even pre-pandemic, the numbers in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, over 80% of the handle was mobile. And now it's 90% or higher. And the advantage to mobile, there's two things. So one is kind of the obvious, right? You can sit on your couch and do it. You don't have to go to a casino. But secondly is the slightly less obvious, which are the types of bets that you're able to make through mobile devices, and the rise of in-play betting, which is something that's not brand new, but it's relatively newer, especially in the United States, to bet on things while a game is going on. And those are odds that then move in real time. So even if you're sitting at a casino, you can't do that. Like you can't walk up to the window there and say like, hey, what's the current odds on, Carson Wentz to throw another interception? I mean, like, because that's changing like every 10 seconds, right? So you've got to be looking at something that can tell you that real time, and you hit a button. So mobile is really doing two things. One is making this so that you don't have to go to casinos, but secondly is it's opening up a whole world of additional types of bets, and that's where the ongoing fan engagement comes from, right? Is those live bets, and so you need mobile to really be able to make that work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess on the heels of that, do you feel as if certain sports are more conducive to placing bets, or eventually, I mean, obviously there's heavy football, heavy basketball, kind of the big sports, but do you see this as, pretty scalable as it relates to the other sports available globally?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, the NFL is obviously the 800-pound gorilla in the room and will remain as such, being a very bet on sport. But when it comes to some of the other sports, live betting, which Evan just touched upon, is something that's really interesting. I mean, you could be sitting in a restaurant or in a bar. Well, normally you could be, but hopefully you will be soon. And you could see a game, whether it be a baseball game, an NBA game, something NHL, something you may not have normally been watching. And all of a sudden, the Yankees just hit a home run. They're up 4-0. I'm going to take the other side at +3.5, right? And that's something that you probably wouldn't have watched or wouldn't have been involved with previously. So I think there's absolutely that applicable nature when it comes to pretty much every sport. One of the things that I've talked about previously, which I think is super interesting, is the potential for sports to pivot as a byproduct of betting. And this is something, so I used to work in NASCAR, and this is something I was peddling to them years ago that they still haven't done and may never do, but I think it's a smart move, is to treat NASCAR like horse betting, where you have, win, play, show, first, second, third, you can do a trifecta, you can do all these things. All of a sudden, if NASCAR, and again, I still think NASCAR should shorten their races and make it heat races where it's 20 laps, 50 laps at a time rather than 400 miles. And take that approach where it's a 10-lap race that takes about 5 minutes, just like a horse race. And I think, Brad Keselowski is going to finish first. I think that Jimmy Johnson, obviously now retired, but is going to finish second, and so forth and so on. And all of a sudden, now you have a really, really interesting version of horse racing that's very bettable and very consumable. So I think you're going to see that transition happen, and that will take a little bit longer. But I think you'll see some of those transitions where games become more aware or self-aware of the betting landscape and how they can fit into it much easier.
Yeah, and I agree. There's two things I'll add. One is the pandemic showed us that people bet on anything. When there weren't any quote unquote real sports and everyone was betting on like Russian table tennis and the Korean baseball leagues and whatever. That just sort of proved the point, right? Like people wanted to bet on something and they wanted to be able to watch it, right? That was the other key, and that sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. And so some of these betting operators even bought like the streaming rights for this stuff, so you could stream Russian table tennis and then you bet on it, right? And so that's one. But then the other is whether or not there are certain sports that are maybe more conducive to this. Is actually interesting in Europe. In most European countries, so soccer is the most bet on sport, but tennis is usually second. And it's because of what I just mentioned, the opportunities for in-play betting. Tennis is the perfect sport to bet on a point or even a game, right? Which is, still lasts maybe like a minute or 2 or 3 minutes. So so tennis, in terms of the handle on tennis, it's huge because of that very nature. You know, we haven't seen a ton of that in baseball, betting on a pitch or on a, you know, or on an at bat. I mean, I think that'll possibly come, but that's sort of been the culture of tennis. And so that's how it's taken off in Europe.
I think, John, one more thing to add there that I think is really interesting. Twitch just released, they may not want to call it a betting plug-in version, but they now have a wagering type system where you can bet on your favorite streamer and bet with them, and they say, hey, well, I get 5 kills in this next Warzone game, and you can say yes or no, and you can win points accordingly. And I think that's where it gets super interesting, is everything becomes bettable. And I think something that we've talked about with a few startup companies that Evan and I have had conversations with is people are going to build sports and build things for betting. It's not going to be like, oh, we should play, you know, rugby because rugby is a game that has such history. Someone's going to invent some game that's bettable that people enjoy watching. And now all of a sudden it's going to be something we can all watch and bet on just because it's consumable and bettable. And I think that's something that we'll see more and more when it comes to video games, but also to some of these obscure new things that we don't even know exist yet that will be surely bet on.
Yeah, I mean, given the widespread traction of the industry recently and it's going to compound in the future, does this present some sort of integrity risk, do you think, for the games, or is this something that really doesn't have to be thought of? It's an afterthought, and if it is there anything being done to address it?
Yeah,
Evan, you can plug one of our portfolio companies here.
Well, so I will, but let me say it this way. Betting does present some non-zero integrity risk to the underlying game, okay? One of the things that can best mitigate that risk is by having that betting occur through legal regulated channels. That is, so the opposite of legal sports betting is not no betting, right? And that's what everyone needs to just honestly accept as fact. Because if people want to argue about that, then you're just you're living on a different planet. People bet on sports, and people have and will continue to. So the idea is do it through legal regulated channels, because that is a way to best ensure the integrity of the underlying product. And there are a litany of examples that you can come up with. I'm blanking on the guy's name, Josh Shaw, the Arizona Cardinals player who bet on football at Las Vegas casino, and they flagged it, right? You know who's not flagging that? Like the street corner bookie, right? Or the the offshore Costa Rican sports book. Like they're not, the gaming regulators and the FBI aren't getting calls from those guys, right? So, and then moreover, there are third-party companies, for example, one that's within the 76 portfolio called US Integrity. It's a third-party company that sports books and teams and leagues and all sorts of entities partner with, and they sort of monitor a variety of activity. They monitor betting handles, they monitor news feeds, they monitor all this stuff, right? Is it perfect? No, of course not. But they can pick up on suspicious activity and then investigate it. It might be nothing, right? But they can look into it. So I think when you hear everyone, and some are far more outspoken than others, the athletic director at the University of Pittsburgh spoke in front of the U.S. Senate this summer and was going on and on and on about how betting is just this awful thing and it's terrible and it's the risking the NCAA and all of these things, right? But if everything that you listen to, you say to yourself, okay, but if we don't have, people are going to bet on college sports, right? Like the March Madness, I forget what the estimates of the March Madness handle were. I mean, it's like billions and billions of dollars have been bet on March Madness, like illegally, right, for years. The alternative to legalized sports betting on the NCAA is not that nobody will bet on it. And if you sort of remind yourself of that, then to me, all of the arguments about how this is risking the integrity of it sort of fall by the wayside. They don't really hold up.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful, and obviously something to keep an eye on as this industry grows, given the astronomical market value that it provides. But I think Dr. Kelly, pass the microphone over to you if you have a question to ask these folks.
All right, thank you, John. Evan, Dan, you made some great points earlier about sport leagues having to be innovative with their sports betting engagement. I know that William Hill has a partnership with the NBA that started, I think, October of 2019. With the NBA bubble, with the return to sports, how do you envision that partnership growing? Because now there seems to be the potential for more engagement with the NBA when it comes to sports betting.
Yeah, I'll kick that one off. I think it's going to be something that it's very nascent right now, but it's going to be something that is very integrated into your experience, right? Viewing experiences are changing at a tremendous clip, regardless of the sport, just in sports in general. You have Twitch with your chat feed, with your emotes, all of these kind of things. That is going to be, in my opinion, the future of traditional sports as well. Is you're going to be able to pick your broadcaster. You're going to be able to pick whether it's a comedian, Tony Romo, who knows a ton about the sport, or just some guy who makes you laugh and he's going to poke fun at the football game you're watching. And I think as part of that, it's going to be this whole experience. And the NBA actually played around with a bet stream. I don't remember the exact name of it this season, where you could go and you could watch, and Steph Curry would hit a three and it would say Steph Curry over under 6.5 3-pointers in this game. Steph Curry over 4 points, 5 assists, whatever it may be. And that to me is where this is really going, is going to be instantaneous. As Evan mentioned, the live betting component is of the utmost importance and is something that is what is true to engagement. I mean, I used the example before. You have a 30-point blowout that's a 28-point spread. All of a sudden, it's interesting. And the leagues, including the NBA, are going to rely on this because there's data that shows that when a game becomes a blowout, people stop watching. And they have a solution for that. And it's not a Band-Aid, it's a permanent solution. So I think you're going to have much more integrated broadcast experience with betting directly embedded into it. As Evan mentioned, you can't quite bet on the next pitch in baseball quite yet, but it will be there where, it'll be immediate. Is it going to be a fastball? Is it going to be a ball? Is it going to be a strike? Is it going to be this? And I think that will be all part of the viewing experience moving forward in sports, not just the NBA, but in general.
And then I have a follow-up as well. So with the NBA's partnership with William Hill and everything you just mentioned, then what happens with March Madness if that becomes, could that be a potential partner as well, or would that open up Pandora's box?
Will it or should it? So the NCAA is not. They're still sort of sounding the alarms on this, and for the reasons I just mentioned, I think it's completely counterintuitive. Maybe not counterintuitive, but it's illogical. There are some out there in the collegiate sports world that have, quote unquote, seen the light. The University of Colorado has a deal actually with PointsBet. To me, that is understanding what the sports betting industry is all about. It is actually furthering the integrity of the product by sort of embracing the company and saying, we're going to work together. And it's also recognizing that sports betting is an industry, right? UNLV has, a world-renowned, it's called the International Gaming Institute, right? Bo Bernhard runs it, and he has for decades. And it's if you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, of course, right? Because that's the industry in Las Vegas, and they need to train people to be casino executives, right? Well, sports betting is an industry, and it's here to stay, and most of the people that know anything about it right now are coming from other countries. So, we're to the extent that some U.S. universities can sort of embrace the industry and teach it, and the NCAA can embrace it. I think that's a good idea for everyone.
Great. Thanks, Evan. And Dan, that's helpful as well. Paulina, did you have a question that kind of ties into what they're?
A little bit about live betting. The first thing that kind of came to mind for me was F1 and their partnership with AWS and really what that's going to do for that live betting. Hopefully, in the next 2 seasons. When I grew up, I was fortunate enough to actually go to the races in Montreal with my dad, but a lot of people, don't have the opportunity to do that. When you think of the younger generation, how does that live betting, how do you connect with that younger generation that doesn't really have the purchasing power to spend upwards of $500 to actually go to that event?
Yeah, I think live betting is a great way to create fandom, right? When you think about your early memories, I remember going to a Giants game and seeing Michael Strahan, and that's the reason why I wore number 92 when I played football. And those memories are great, and they'll forever be there. And I think it's something that's forever a part of sports. But as you kind of evolve, I think it's all of a sudden this interest level in sports, and right, the older generation may not be as interested as they were. And we see it, there was that Gen Z article that the fandom is kind of aging as our generation ages. And I think this is a way to get them back in. And, I don't necessarily want to tell my kid hey, I'm betting on this because I'm a degenerate, but I will say, I think that this will happen. I think this will happen. And who do you think, let's Evan Ingram. Do you think Evan Ingram's going to catch the next touchdown? And all of a sudden it engages, and it gives you and your parents and your family, whatever it may be, whatever your family setup is, that ability to have some fun with it. And I think that's, I grew up in a gambling household. I was at Harrah's when I was 8 years old, putting money into the slot machines with my grandma illegally. And that's just something that was part of my upbringing in my life, just watching F1 was for you. So I think that's something, is a way to just keep people involved and keep people engaged. And it's honestly whatever you can say about betting is fun, until you lose. But betting is it's a fun thing. And when you can say, who's going to throw the next touchdown, who's going to score the next touchdown, that's fun and that's engaging. And I think it takes sports to that next level and creates memories.
Well, and you mentioned the bankroll, right? And this is, I think, a point that should be made over and over again. Betting needs to be seen as a recreational activity for people who are 21 and over, and it needs to be done within your means if you have those means. And so, a lot people spend recreational dollars in a variety of different ways, right? And some of those are responsible and some of those are irresponsible. And so there are people that have season tickets to the Mets who can easily afford them. And there are people who have season tickets to the Mets who are struggling to put food on their table and should never have season tickets to the Mets, right? So for one, that's a perfectly responsible decision, and for another, it's not. The nice thing about sports betting is that you don't have a fixed price. You can do it at a level that you're comfortable with. And most of the operators will take bets as under $1, right? So if you want to bet $1 on a game, you can do that and watch it and win or lose your dollar, right? So as long as you're sort of viewing it as a recreational activity, you're doing it within your means. The industry's taken a million steps toward trying to promote responsible gaming. I'm telling you, it comes from an operator. They don't want people betting over and above their means. They want people doing this and enjoying it and staying customers for a long time and looking at it as a responsible recreational activity. That's what the industry wants. And I think that it does present an opportunity for a lot of people, at least, to engage it that way if they're able to do so.
Awesome. Ben, I think we have a couple questions from some of the participants. If you want to run with the ball on one of those.
Yeah, for sure. So Evan's curious, to what extent will this rising tide in legalized sports betting lift all sports betting? For example, explicitly legalize person-to-person betting, filling out boxes for the Super Bowl or your NCAA tournament bracket?
Yeah, I don't know that it'll get that widespread. I think that you're always going to see this sort of remain within a regulated industry, and it's no different than other things that are legal and regulated, especially those that are that are age restricted. So, tobacco and alcohol are kind of two obvious examples. prohibition got repealed, but you still can't just, in Pennsylvania at least, and in most states, you can't just, brew beer in your basement and sell it, without sort of going through those regulated channels. So some of that's a consumer protection issue and other things. So I think that betting is always going to be regulated. Where I see the opportunity for it to sort of spread is beyond sports. So in Europe right now, you can bet on, politics. I mean, there was a ton of news coming out around our presidential election and what the odds were. And those are all like real European markets. So I think things like that are going to generate interest. And I would think that you'll see certain jurisdictions in the United States legalizing forms of betting like that. Far before you're going to see them just sort of strip away all of the restrictions on it and say, yeah, like anyone can open up a sports book or a casino or take bets, because then you're a little bit more in the wild, wild west.
Yeah, was just giving Dan a chance to chime in there if he wanted to as well.
No, I think Evan covered it. He did a great job.
Perfect. Yeah, so another question from our audience here. So Thomas brings up this point of lately European soccer leagues are kind of moving away from sponsorships from betting firms. I mean, is there any particular reason that you can point to why that is? Are there any issues with sports betting companies being used as sponsors?
Yeah, I'll speak from the financial side and kind of some of the rumors that have come out, and then I'll let Evan chime in on the more government and legal side of it. So, I mean, it's something that we've seen. I mean, Serie A is an example where it was removed, and the problem is that, as Evan pointed out, it's not gambling or no gambling; it's gambling or illegal gambling. So it's whether you want to do that, and then when you have the illegal gambling, as Evan pointed out earlier, you run into integrity issues. So when it is not being monitored at a government level or a legal level, it makes it a lot harder to do. And I think, if you look at the Premier League last season, about 50% of the jersey partners of the entire league were betting companies. And in football and global football, you have in certain areas, you have financial fair play, where you can spend a percentage of your sponsorship dollars and your total revenue as a club. So if you remove an entire vertical from a sponsorship revenue, all of a sudden your club is less competitive. And in Serie A specifically, this was an area where there's a lot of concerns from the club saying, well, how am I going to compete with Man City and Chelsea and Liverpool of the EPL if they can bring in more money and have more money to spend on players than I do, because they're allowed to have betting partners. So it's something that I think you'll see a lot of pushback on. It's kind of a case-by-case basis. I mean, in the NBA, you can have betting partners now, but they won't let it on the jersey patch for now. That may change. Who knows? I think that it will at some point, but it's something that you have to be cautious of. I'm surprised to see it go backwards. I don't envision it going backwards in the US. I think we've waited long enough, and now that it's here, it's here. But I think that the perspective from the betting company or from the government and the governing bodies is that they're worried about the widespread of betting, and they're worried that too many people are doing it. It's too public facing, which, as Evan already pointed out, it's happening one way or another. It's just a matter of whether you're going to protect it and monetize it, or you're just going to let it happen behind your back.
Yeah, I think what happened in Europe, in certain European countries, at least Spain, is that it just the advertising got to be too much. And it kind of overwhelmed everyone, and then you had a recoil, right? For every reaction, there's an equal and opposite reaction, and that was basically what happened there. And then suddenly it was all these forces that said, this is ridiculous. My kids are watching soccer. Every single ad is a betting ad. They're looking at jersey, and you have it get scaled back. And so in England, they have what's called a whistle-to-whistle ban on gambling advertising during the game itself. It's something that I think the U.S. industry is aware of, and at least claims to be cognizant of, and is not trying to go down the same path. At the same time, if you guys watch football on Sundays, at least here in Pennsylvania, and I'm assuming New York, there's a lot of gambling ads. So I think that's the risk, is that the advertising just becomes overwhelming, and then you get pushback. I think that's what happened in Europe, and that what is at least there is some risk for in the United States as well.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So yeah, I think we got one more Q&A in this last 10 minutes. So what developments are you guys seeing along the lines of sports hospitality? Whether sports books that are located inside of arenas or new entertainment complexes that are built around sports books themselves, what are some new locations where sports betting might start blossoming?
Evan specifically worked on the deal at the Wells Fargo Center, so I'll let him take the lead there, and then I'll follow up with my interest here.
Yeah, sure. It's I mean, the short answer is it's a little bit state by state dependent based on what you can do. So do you have mobile betting, and where can you have a physical sports book? As Dan mentioned, I worked when I was at Rivers on our deal with the Wells Fargo Center where the Flyers and the Sixers play to put these betting lounges in the building. And so are they? Well, they look and feel like sports books, and they're staffed with brand ambassadors. But if you're going to bet, you have to bet on your phone, because that's how Pennsylvania does it. You can only place a physical bet in a casino, but you can bet on your phone anywhere. So there's sort of these activated sponsorships, right? They're betting lounges. So that's one example. There's sort of a new sports bar idea that I'm seeing talked about in Center City, Philadelphia, where people want it to be sort of centered around sports betting. They're going to have sponsorships. Again, it's got to be done through your phone or through a mobile device. But they think that they can sort of leverage that and play into it. Other areas, though, Washington, D.C. is somewhere where betting, you can get a license that's sort of as a sports bar to actually take sports bets. That hasn't launched yet, but they're on the cusp of doing that in certain places. It's a question of how successful will it be. Do people want to do that? If you have mobile as an option, is that just easier? But I think, to your point, it's something that will help in sort of the greater hospitality world. There's a company that we're intimately familiar with called Betterview, BETTORVIEW. They work with those hospitality enterprises, like they have a deal with Hooters to sort of stream certain overlay odds on the screens and things like that. So there are a lot of different ways as a hospitality entity that you can use sports betting to your benefit, even if you're not a sports betting operator or working directly with one yourself.
Awesome.
Dan, were you going to add, or? Oh.
Yeah, I can jump in there. Yeah, I think it's interesting. And Evan points out, I mean, we're seeing a lot of these, we're going to put a betting lounge in our stadium and this and that. And as Evan mentioned, it's state by state basis. But, if you're at a stadium, your betting lounge is no different than what was your fantasy football lounge 4 years ago, in the sense of it's a place to go and watch games and engage. If you're betting mobily like it is in Pennsylvania, it really makes it no different than any other part of the stadium. You just might have accessibility to watch some other things. So I think it's interesting. I think, Buffalo Wild Wings had a partnership with MGM, which I think is really cool. I think it's native. It's finding ways where these people are and engaging with them there, because at the end of the day, it's about customer acquisition and new users. And so if places that are non-traditional, like a Buffalo Wild Wings, where sports fans exist but may not be gamblers or may not know how to gamble in the conventional sense, can partner up to provide value for the betting operators, I think that's an interesting avenue as well, in conjunction with some of the stuff we're seeing that Evan talked about.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I'm just cognizant of the time here. I do want to ask a question that's probably applicable to a number of people in the room here. But for those looking to familiarize themselves with the industry and make it a possible career, are there any resources, blogs, et cetera, certain platforms maybe that you feel are worthwhile to subscribe to, or to keep tabs on daily, to stay educated and informed on industry trends, and kind of become that fundamental cornerstone of the skill set needed to be successful in this industry as a professional?
Yeah, Evan, I'll kick this off, because I've asked Evan this question and have sent him young folks who I've spoken to are interested. And So what I think is so cool is and I said this to people when I was an NYU student, is the sports industry mirrors every other industry. There's accounting, there's marketing, there's sellers, there's sponsorship, there's everything you could imagine. And that is equally as true in the sports betting world. If you think selling is an opportunity, it's there. I mean, the host game, the affiliate game, like there's so many areas that make a ton of sense. If it's the marketing side, there's absolutely, as you guys well know, with all these deals that are coming into fruition, marketing is a huge component. If it's finance, if it's legal, I mean, Evan's, obviously an attorney by trade and was the first example of that. So there are these opportunities that you guys are interested in, regardless of whether, you think you want to be in marketing or you want to be in sales. They exist in the sports land or in the betting landscape just as they do everywhere else. So I'll throw that out there just as a generality, but let Evan kind of jump in on where the resources might be had and any advice on that.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I have three answers. One is that there are a number of good places to go for sports business news. The guys at Sportico do a really good job. That's a newer publication. Dan, what's Pomp's thing? Huddle Up? Is that, yeah, like, yeah, I mean, there's a long list, but, find some good sports business publications, Sports Business Journal, and, they do talk about the betting industry a good amount because it is such a prevalent part of what's going on in sports right now. So that's one. Secondly is one of the opportunities, if you will, that's come out of COVID are that a lot of these conferences have jumped to being virtual and are either free to attend or rather are quite inexpensive. And so there's one that actually just concluded today that I spoke at yesterday called the Sports Betting Community, the Betting on Sports America conference. That's normally a big, huge thing actually in the New York area, but this year it was virtual. Those, you can seek those out. Dan's speaking at the National Sports Forum virtually next week. There are a lot of those opportunities, and I suspect that some of them, like I said, are free, and others, my guess is if you say, hey, I'm a student, I'm just interested, they'll probably throw you a pass if you want. So those are great opportunities both to learn about the industry, but also to network and reach out and just say, hey, do you have 15 minutes to chat? This is my background, I'm interested. Not just, oh, I want to talk to you, but like I want to talk to you about something specific, right? And I think you have those opportunities. And then the last thing I would mention is my favorite book that I've read on this, which is not really about the business itself, but it's sort of more from the bettor's mindset, but it's just really well written, is The Logic of Sports Betting by Ed Miller and Matt Davidow. It's a short book and it's good, and tell Ed that I recommended the book to you guys. But it's a quick read, and it's just, if you don't have much of a perspective on this and you want to spend a couple hours getting one, it's a pretty good way to do it.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, I think something that's really interesting is a lot of these betting companies are publicly traded. And so the beauty of that is a lot of that financial information is publicly available. And so from the Darren Ravels of the world, the Joe Pomplianos, like we talked about, who does the Huddle Up piece, which I think is really great. These guys are constantly tweeting about it. So if you're interested in it, check these guys out on Twitter. David Purdum's an ESPN writer who writes specifically on this topic. So there's plenty of folks out there. And because of the public nature of the information, it's really cool to dig into it.
And obviously you two as well. This is arguably the most valuable resource, tapping into the Alumni Network. So we really appreciate you taking the time and kind of re-engaging with the students here and those who are guests. But I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone here that we'll walk away with an increased amount of knowledge as it relates to the sports betting industry. And a lot of excitement to go along with it. So I'm sure that this might not be the last event that we have with 76 Capital, given the amount of attendees that we've had sign up, but it's definitely a great way to kick off this relationship with you guys and give a nice brief introductory session on the sports betting landscape. So thank you again for your time.
You got it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Dr. Kelly, if you have any closing remarks, floor is
Okay,
yours.
great. Okay. Thank you, John. Thank you, Paulina. Thank you, Ben. Of course, thank you, Dan Bravado and Evan Davis. We really appreciate your support for our alumni series. And to everyone out there watching, we look forward to seeing you in 2021 with our next slate of programming. Thank you and take care.